The sun hung low over the sprawling city of Chicago, its golden rays spilling through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Jonathan Reed's penthouse apartment, casting long shadows across the marble floors. Jonathan stood by the window, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his tailored suit, staring out at the skyline that stretched endlessly before him. He had built this empire from nothing, brick by brick, deal by deal, but despite the wealth and success, there was a heaviness in his chest that no amount of money could lift. His eyes flickered to the small figure sitting quietly on the plush couch behind him. Emily, his 8-year-old daughter, clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly against her chest, her wide brown eyes fixed on the television screen as cartoons played silently. She hadn't spoken a word since her mother died 2 years ago in a car accident, and though doctors called it selective mutism, triggered by trauma, Jonathan knew better. It wasn't just grief, it was guilt. He saw it in the way she avoided looking at him, in the way she flinched when he tried to hug her. She blamed herself for not being able to save her mom, even though she had been safely tucked away at school when the crash happened. The silence between them was suffocating, a thick fog that neither of them knew how to escape. Jonathan turned away from the window, his jaw tightening as he forced himself to smile. "Emily," he said softly, kneeling down beside her. She didn't respond, didn't even glance in his direction. Instead, she reached out with one tiny hand and adjusted the volume on the remote control, turning the sound up slightly, not because she wanted to hear the cartoon, but because she preferred noise to conversation. Jonathan sighed, running a hand through his graying hair. He had tried everything: therapy sessions, art classes, even bribing her with toys and candy. Nothing worked. Every attempt to break through her shell felt like hitting a brick wall, leaving him more frustrated and heartbroken than before. He missed her laughter, her questions, her endless chatter about dinosaurs and princesses. Now, all he got were fleeting glances and the occasional nod or shake of her head. It was as if she had retreated into some unreachable corner of herself, leaving him stranded on the outside. That morning, however, something inside Jonathan snapped. He couldn't keep living like this, tiptoeing around her, afraid to say or do the wrong thing. He needed to try something different, something drastic. As Emily sat mesmerized by the moving images on the screen, Jonathan walked over to the coat rack by the door and grabbed 2 jackets. "Come on," he said firmly, holding one out toward her. Emily blinked, confused, but made no move to get up. Jonathan hesitated for a moment, then crossed the room and gently slipped the jacket over her shoulders. "We're going to the park," he announced, his voice steady despite the lump forming in his throat. Emily looked up at him, her expression unreadable, but she allowed him to guide her toward the elevator without protest. The park was alive with activity when they arrived, a kaleidoscope of colors and sounds that seemed almost otherworldly after the sterile quiet of their apartment. Children laughed as they chased each other around the playground. Couples strolled hand in hand along the winding paths, and vendors called out to passers-by, offering hot dogs and ice cream cones. Jonathan led Emily to a bench near the pond, where ducks floated lazily across the water. He pointed them out to her, hoping to spark some kind of reaction, but she simply stared ahead, her face blank. Frustration bubbled within him, threatening to boil over. Why wouldn't she talk? Why wouldn't she look at him? Desperation clawed at his insides as he racked his brain for ideas. "Do you remember coming here with Mummy?" he asked suddenly, his voice cracking slightly. Emily stiffened, her grip on the stuffed rabbit tightening. Jonathan cursed himself inwardly. Bringing up her mother had been a mistake. He could see it in the way her shoulders tensed, in the way her breathing quickened ever so slightly. But he couldn't stop now. "She loved feeding the ducks," he continued, his tone softer this time. "She'd always bring breadcrumbs, and you 2 would sit right here, laughing." His words trailed off as he realized Emily wasn't listening anymore. Her attention had shifted to something or someone else entirely. Following her gaze, Jonathan spotted a man sitting on a nearby bench, strumming a guitar. The man was tall and lean, with warm brown skin and a kind face framed by a neatly trimmed beard. His voice carried across the breeze, rich and soulful, singing a melody so hauntingly beautiful that it stopped Jonathan in his tracks. For a moment, he forgot about everything: the weight of his grief, the frustration of his failed attempts to connect with his daughter, and simply listened. Then he noticed Emily. She was no longer clutching her stuffed rabbit to her chest. Instead, she was leaning forward slightly, her eyes wide with wonder. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, though no sound came out. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat. This was the most animated he'd seen her in years. The man finished his song. bowing his head briefly before beginning another. Emily remained transfixed, her body swaying almost imperceptibly to the rhythm. Jonathan watched her closely, marveling at the transformation taking place before his eyes. It was as if the music had unlocked something inside her, something hidden and fragile yet bursting with potential. Without thinking, he reached out and placed a hand on her shoulder. She didn't pull away, which surprised him. Instead, she turned her head slightly to look at him, her expression softening in a way he hadn't seen since before the accident. Encouraged, Jonathan rose to his feet and held out his hand. "Let's go closer," he suggested, his voice barely above a whisper. To his amazement, Emily nodded and slipped her small hand into his lap, allowing him to lead her toward the musician. As they approached, the man glanced up and smiled warmly. "Hi there," he said, his voice as smooth and inviting as his songs. Emily hesitated, tugging lightly on Jonathan's hand, but the man didn't seem bothered. "You like music?" he asked, addressing her directly. Emily didn't respond verbally, but her nod was enough to make the man chuckle softly. "Well, I'm glad to hear it. My name's Marcus." He gestured to the guitar resting on his lap. "Ever seen one of these up close?" Emily shook her head, her curiosity piqued. Marcus grinned and leaned forward, tilting the instrument so she could see it better. "It's pretty cool, huh? Want to give it a try?" Jonathan tensed, unsure whether this was a good idea, but Emily surprised him again by stepping forward. Tentatively, she reached out and plucked one of the strings, the sound ringing out clear and bright. A faint giggle escaped her lips, the first sound she'd made in years, and Jonathan froze, his heart pounding wildly in his chest. Tears welled up in his eyes as he watched her experiment with the guitar, her giggles growing louder and more confident with each note. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was joy in her voice, however small and hesitant it might be. And as Marcus began playing another song, encouraging Emily to join in, Jonathan realized that maybe, just maybe, they weren't as broken as he'd thought. The man on the bench, Marcus Hale, had a presence that was both calming and magnetic, as though his soul radiated warmth through every note he played. His fingers danced effortlessly across the strings of his weathered guitar, coaxing melodies that seemed to weave themselves into the fabric of the park. The music wasn't just sound, it was emotion, raw and unfiltered, pouring out of him like a river breaking free from its dam. Jonathan couldn't help but feel drawn to it, even as his mind raced with questions about this stranger who had somehow managed to capture Emily's attention in a way no one else could. Marcus noticed their approach immediately, his sharp eyes flickering up with an easy smile that put Jonathan at ease despite himself. "You've got good taste," Marcus said lightly, nodding toward Emily as she stood hesitantly by her father's side, clutching her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. "Not many kids these days appreciate live music." Jonathan cleared his throat, unsure how to respond. She doesn't usually react like this," he admitted, gesturing vaguely toward Emily, whose wide-eyed fascination with the guitar hadn't waned. Marcus chuckled softly, leaning back against the bench. "Well, maybe she just needed the right song," he replied, his tone carrying a hint of mystery that made Jonathan curious as Marcus continued playing. Jonathan found himself studying the man more closely. There was something about him, something rugged yet refined, like a puzzle waiting to be solved. His clothes were simple but clean, his hands calloused from years of hard work, and his face bore faint lines etched by time and experience. Yet there was also a kindness in his expression, an openness that invited trust without demanding anything in return. When Marcus paused mid-song to adjust the tuning pegs on his guitar, Emily took a tentative step forward, her gaze fixed intently on the instrument. Jonathan held his breath, half expecting her to retreat back into her shell, but instead, she reached out cautiously, her fingertips brushing against the wood. Marcus didn't flinch or pull away. Instead, he smiled encouragingly and handed her the guitar. "Go ahead," he urged gently. "Feel it." Emily hesitated for a moment before wrapping her small hands around the neck of the guitar, her movements hesitant but deliberate. Her touch was featherlight, almost reverent, as if she feared breaking something precious. Jonathan watched in stunned silence as Marcus guided Emily's fingers to the strings, showing her how to pluck them one by one. Each note rang out clear and pure, resonating through the air like a spark igniting a flame. Emily's initial shyness melted away bit by bit, replaced by a growing sense of wonder. For the first time in years, she seemed fully present, her body swaying slightly to the rhythm of the music. It was mesmerizing to see her like this, alive, engaged, and unburdened by the weight of her silence. Jonathan felt tears pricking at the corners of his eyes, but he blinked them away quickly, unwilling to let his emotions overwhelm him. Instead, he focused on the scene unfolding before him, Marcus patiently teaching Emily, his voice low and soothing as he explained the basics of chords and scales. There was no rush, no pressure, just a steady flow of encouragement and patience that seemed to unlock something deep within. Emily's heart dot when Marcus suggested they try singing together. Jonathan tensed, expecting Emily to recoil or shake her head in refusal. But to his astonishment, she didn't shy away. Instead, she tilted her head thoughtfully, listening intently as Marcus sang a soft, lilting tune about friendship and courage. His voice was rich and soulful, wrapping around the words like a warm blanket. As the last notes faded into the breeze, Marcus turned to Emily with a hopeful smile. "Your turn," he said simply, holding out the guitar as if offering her a gift. Emily froze, her eyes widening in panic. Jonathan instinctively stepped forward, ready to intervene, but Marcus raised a hand subtly, signaling him to stay back. "It's okay," Marcus murmured, his voice steady and reassuring. "You don't have to sing loud, just let it come naturally." Emily stared at him for a long moment, her chest rising and falling rapidly as she wrestled with some invisible force inside her. Then, ever so slowly, she nodded. Her lips parted, trembling slightly, and a single shaky note emerged, a fragile sound, barely audible over the rustling leaves and distant laughter of children. But it was enough. Enough to make Jonathan's knees buckle beneath him, enough to send a shiver down Marcus's spine, and enough to fill the air with a kind of magic that neither of them could explain. Encouraged by her progress, Marcus began playing again, weaving a gentle melody that gave Emily room to experiment. At first, her attempts were halting and uncertain, little more than whispers lost in the wind. But with each passing moment, her confidence grew. She started mimicking Marcus's rhythms, adding her own touches here and there until their music blended seamlessly together. It wasn't perfect, in fact. It was far from it, but it was alive, pulsing with energy and emotion. Passersby began to gather around them, drawn by the unexpected harmony between the seasoned musician and the shy little girl. Some clapped softly, others whispered words of admiration, but most simply stood in awe, watching as Emily transformed before their very eyes. Jonathan, however, couldn't bring himself to move. He remained rooted to the spot, his heart hammering wildly in his chest as he struggled to process what was happening. This wasn't just a breakthrough, was a miracle, a glimpse of hope after years of despair. By the time Marcus brought the impromptu performance to a close, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the park in a soft twilight glow. Emily reluctantly handed the guitar back to Marcus, her cheeks flushed with excitement and exhaustion. She looked up at him with an expression Jonathan hadn't seen in years. Gratitude. It was fleeting, lasting only a second or two, but it was real. Marcus grinned, ruffling her hair affectionately. "You're a natural," he said warmly. "We'll have to do this again sometime." Emily nodded eagerly, her grip on the stuffed rabbit loosening just a fraction. Jonathan finally found his voice, clearing his throat as he stepped forward. "Thank you," he said hoarsely, his words laced with emotion. "I don't know how to repay you for this." Marcus waved him off dismissively. "No need," he replied with a shrug. "Sometimes all someone needs is a little push in the right direction." His words lingered in the air, heavy with meaning, as Jonathan realized that Marcus might understand more about loss and healing than he let on. There was a depth to him, a quiet resilience that hinted at battles fought and scars earned. Whatever those battles were, Jonathan decided, they had shaped Marcus into the kind of person who could reach out and mend broken pieces without asking for anything in return. As they walked home later that evening, Emily skipped ahead of Jonathan, her steps lighter than they'd been in years. She still hadn't spoken a full sentence, but the change in her demeanor was unmistakable. Gone was the guarded stiffness, replaced by a newfound curiosity and joy that filled Jonathan with a mixture of relief and awe. He glanced down at her, marveling at the transformation, for the first time since her mother's death. He allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could get better. And as he tucked her into bed that night, humming one of the songs Marcus had taught her, he made a silent promise to himself. He would do whatever it took to keep this spark alive, no matter what it cost him. The days that followed Emily's encounter with Marcus at the park became a turning point for both her and Jonathan, though neither of them fully understood it at first. Every morning, Jonathan woke up with a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, his mind already racing ahead to the afternoon when they would return to the park to see Marcus again. It wasn't just about music anymore. It was about connection, about breaking down walls that had stood firm for far too long. Each time they arrived, Marcus greeted them with a warm smile and an open heart, as if their presence brought him as much joy as it did them. He never pushed Emily or demanded anything from her. Instead, he let her set the pace, guiding her gently whenever she seemed unsure. Over time, Emily grew more comfortable, not just with the guitar, but with expressing herself in ways she hadn't before. She began mimicking Marcus's laughter, pointing out birds in the sky, and even scribbling drawings in a notebook he gave her one day after noticing how intently she watched other children coloring on the playground. These small gestures might have seemed insignificant to others, but to Jonathan, they were monumental, a sign that his daughter was slowly coming back to life. One crisp autumn afternoon, as golden leaves swirled around their feet, Marcus turned to Jonathan while Emily practiced a new chord progression on the guitar. "She's got a lot bottled up inside," he said thoughtfully, his voice low enough so only Jonathan could hear. "Music helps her express what she can't say, but you need to let her know it's okay to feel, to cry, to laugh, to scream if she has to." His words hit Jonathan like a punch to the gut, forcing him to confront something he'd been avoiding all along: his own grief. He had buried himself in work after his wife's death, using meetings and deadlines as distractions from the pain. But now, standing there watching Emily strum the guitar with growing confidence, he realized how much he'd shut himself off, not just from her, but from his own emotions. The realization left him reeling, guilt weighing heavily on his shoulders, as he nodded mutely, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. That evening, as they walked home, hand in hand, Jonathan knelt down to Emily's level and whispered, "I miss Mummy too, sweetheart. It's okay to talk about her." For the first time, Emily looked directly into his eyes, her expression softening. Though she still didn't speak, her little hand slipped into his, holding on tightly, as if to say she understood. As weeks turned into months, Emily continued to flourish under Marcus's guidance, their bond deepening with each passing day. One chilly morning, Marcus arrived at the park with a surprise for her: a small ukulele decorated with colorful stickers. "This one's yours," he said with a grin, handing it to her. "But only if you promise to keep making music." Emily beamed, hugging the instrument close to her chest, as if it were the most precious thing in the world. Later that day, as Marcus played a familiar tune on his guitar, Emily joined in hesitantly, strumming along on her ukulele. The harmony between them grew stronger with each note, drawing a small crowd of onlookers who clapped and cheered enthusiastically. Encouraged by the applause, Marcus urged Emily to try singing along. At first, she shook her head vigorously, fear flashing in her eyes. But then, remembering her father's words about letting herself feel, she closed her eyes and opened her mouth. A single, shaky note emerged, followed by another, until finally, she sang a full line of the song. The crowd erupted in cheers, but none were louder than Jonathan, who sobbed openly as pride swelled in his chest. Emily's voice wasn't perfect. It was raw, vulnerable, and achingly human, but it was hers. And in that moment, Jonathan felt a weight lift off his shoulders. A weight he hadn't even realized he'd been carrying. Despite the progress they were making, Jonathan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to Marcus's story than he let on. There were moments when Marcus's easy smile faltered, replaced by a fleeting shadow of sadness that disappeared almost as quickly as it appeared. One afternoon, as Emily sat nearby sketching pictures in her notebook, Jonathan decided to ask, "Marcus," he began hesitantly, "how did you learn to play like that? You're incredible." Marcus chuckled softly, leaning back against the bench. "Well, I used to teach music at a school downtown," he explained, his tone casual, but tinged with something deeper. "Loved every minute of it until some folks decided my skin color made me unfit for the job." He shrugged, as if trying to dismiss the bitterness creeping into his voice, but Jonathan caught it anyway. "That's ridiculous," Jonathan replied firmly, anger simmering beneath his words. "What happened?" Marcus sighed, staring out at the horizon. "Let's just say people don't always see past the surface. Long story short, I lost my job, and it took me a while to figure out what to do next. Music kept me going though. It always does." Jonathan listened silently, his respect for Marcus growing with each word. He realized then that Marcus wasn't just helping Emily, he was teaching them both about resilience, about finding light in the darkest places. Inspired by their conversations, Jonathan started opening up more, sharing stories about Emily's mother and the dreams they'd had. For their family, slowly but surely, the silence that had once defined their relationship began to fade, replaced by moments of shared laughter and understanding. Emily, too, seemed to thrive in this newfound atmosphere of openness. She started experimenting with her voice, humming tunes softly to herself, and occasionally joining in when Marcus sang. Her confidence grew steadily, and soon she was performing simple songs alongside him, her voice growing stronger with each attempt. The transformation was remarkable, not just in her but in Jonathan as well. For the first time in years, he felt like a father, again, not just a provider or a protector, but someone who truly connected with his child. By late fall, the trio had become a familiar sight in the park, their impromptu performances drawing larger crowds each week. Parents brought their children to watch, couples lingered on benches, and strangers stopped mid-walk to listen. Word spread quickly, and soon local newspapers featured a small article about the unlikely friendship between a millionaire, his mute daughter, and a street musician. The attention didn't faze Marcus. He brushed it off with a laugh, saying he preferred the quiet anonymity of the park. But Jonathan saw it as an opportunity. Grateful beyond measure for everything Marcus had done for Emily, he offered him a position at his company's foundation, which aimed to support underprivileged communities through education and arts programs. Marcus accepted without hesitation, seeing it as a chance to rebuild bridges and inspire others. "You've changed our lives, Marcus," Jonathan said sincerely during their final meeting at the park. "Now it's your turn to change the world." Marcus smiled, shaking his head. "Nah, man. All I did was play a few songs. You all did the hard part. You opened yourselves up to something new. Don't forget that." As winter approached, the air grew colder, but the warmth between them remained constant. On Christmas Eve, Jonathan and Emily stood side by side on stage at a local shelter, accompanied by Marcus. Together, they performed a heartfelt rendition of Silent Night, dedicating it to all those who had lost loved ones, but still found joy in life. As the final notes faded into the night, Jonathan looked down at Emily, her face glowing with happiness. For the first time in years, he felt truly whole. And as Marcus raised his guitar for one last song, the three of them shared a knowing smile, a reminder that sometimes the most profound connections come from the simplest acts of humanity. Winter had settled over Chicago, blanketing the city in a thick layer of snow that muffled the usual hustle and bustle of life. The park where Emily, Jonathan, and Marcus had spent so many afternoons was now quiet, its trees bare and skeletal against the gray sky. Yet inside Jonathan's penthouse apartment, warmth radiated, not just from the fireplace crackling softly in the corner, but from the newfound energy that filled the space. Emily sat cross-legged on the living room floor, her ukulele resting on her lap as she strummed chords Marcus had taught her. Her fingers moved with surprising confidence, her brow furrowed in concentration as she tried to perfect the melody. It was a stark contrast to the shy, withdrawn girl who had once clung to her stuffed rabbit like a shield. Jonathan watched her from the doorway, his heart swelling with pride and something deeper, almost bittersweet, a mix of joy and longing for all the moments they had lost. He couldn't help but marvel at how much had changed since that fateful day in the park when Marcus first handed Emily a guitar. She wasn't just finding her voice. She was rediscovering herself, piece by piece. Marcus visited them regularly now, not just at the park, but also at their home, bringing with him stories, songs, and an unshakable optimism that seemed to light up even the darkest corners of their lives. One evening, as Emily practiced a new song, Marcus turned to Jonathan with a thoughtful expression. "She's ready," he said simply, his tone carrying a weight that made Jonathan pause. "Ready for what?" Jonathan asked, though he already suspected the answer. Marcus leaned back on the couch, his hands clasped loosely in his lap. "To share her music with others. To step out of this bubble we've created and let the world hear her." Jonathan hesitated, uncertainty flickering across his face. The idea of exposing Emily to strangers, of putting her fragile progress on display, felt risky, almost reckless. But Marcus wasn't suggesting it lightly. "She's stronger than you think," he added gently. "And sometimes, the best way to heal is to give back." His words lingered in the air, planting a seed of possibility in Jonathan's mind. That night, as Emily drifted off to sleep, Jonathan sat by her bedside, watching the rise and fall of her chest. He thought about everything they had been through. The silence, the pain, the slow, painstaking journey toward healing, and realized Marcus was right. Emily deserved more than just private victories. She deserved to shine. The opportunity came sooner than expected. A local community center was hosting a holiday concert to raise funds for families in need. And Marcus suggested Emily perform alongside him. It doesn't have to be big, he assured Jonathan, sensing his hesitation. Just one song, maybe two. Enough to show her she can do it. Emily listened quietly as they discussed it, her eyes darting between her father and Marcus. When Jonathan finally turned to her, asking if she wanted to try, she nodded slowly, her grip tightening on the ukulele in her hands. Over the next few weeks, preparation became their shared mission. Marcus coached Emily tirelessly, teaching her not just the technical aspects of performance, but also how to channel her emotions into her music. "Let the song speak for you," he told her one afternoon, his voice steady and encouraging. "If you're scared, let the fear come out in the notes. If you're happy, let the happiness flow. That's what makes music real." Emily absorbed every word, her determination growing with each practice session. By the time the day of the concert arrived, she was nervous but resolute, her small frame radiating a quiet strength that left Jonathan in awe. The community center was packed when they arrived, the air buzzing with anticipation. Families filled the rows of folding chairs, children tugging at their parents' sleeves, while volunteers bustled around, setting up microphones and adjusting lighting. Emily clung to Jonathan's hand as they made their way backstage, her knuckles white with tension. Marcus knelt down beside her, his presence calm and grounding. "Remember," he said softly, "you're not doing this alone. We're here with you, every step of the way." Emily nodded, taking a deep breath as she stepped onto the stage moments later. The spotlight hit her like a wave, blinding and overwhelming, but she didn't falter. Beside her, Marcus strummed the opening chords of their chosen song, a gentle tune about hope and resilience. Emily closed her eyes, letting the music guide her. At first, her voice was barely audible, trembling slightly as she found her footing. But then, something shifted, a spark ignited within her, and her voice grew steadier, clearer, until it filled the room like sunlight breaking through clouds. The audience fell silent, captivated by the raw emotion pouring out of her. Tears streamed down Jonathan's face as he watched his daughter transform before his eyes, her fear melting away to reveal a courage he hadn't known she possessed. When the final note faded into the stillness, the room erupted into applause, cheers echoing off the walls as people rose to their feet. Emily stood frozen for a moment, stunned by the reaction, before turning to Marcus with wide eyes. He grinned, giving her a thumbs up, and she broke into a shy smile that lit up her entire face. Backstage afterward, strangers approached her to offer congratulations, their praise warming her cheeks. For the first time, Emily didn't shrink away from attention. Instead, she accepted it with quiet grace, her confidence bolstered by the knowledge that she had touched hearts. Jonathan wrapped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her close as he whispered, "I'm so proud of you." She looked up at him, her lips curving into a soft smile, and for the first time in years, she spoke without prompting. "Thank you, Daddy," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper, but clear as a bell. The words hit Jonathan like a tidal wave, knocking the breath from his lungs. He hugged her tightly, tears streaming unchecked down his face, unable to believe how far they had come. The success of the concert marked a turning point, not just for Emily, but for Jonathan and Marcus as well. Inspired by the event, Jonathan expanded his foundation's focus to include music therapy programs, partnering with schools and shelters to provide instruments and lessons to underprivileged children. Marcus took charge of the initiative, using his experience to train volunteers and mentor young musicians. Together, they created a network of support that reached far beyond their little trio, touching lives in ways none of them could have imagined. Emily thrived in this environment, her passion for music blossoming into a talent that continued to grow. She performed at fundraisers, charity events, and even school assemblies, each performance building her confidence and deepening her connection with others. Through it all, Marcus remained a constant presence, guiding her with patience and wisdom. "You're not just learning to play music," he told her one day during rehearsal. "You're learning to live it, to let it guide you through whatever comes your way." As spring approached, the snow began to melt, revealing patches of green beneath the frost. Life felt lighter somehow, as if the weight of the past had finally lifted. Jonathan found himself smiling more often, laughing freely for the first time in years. Even the memories of Emily's mother no longer brought the sharp sting of grief. They were tinged with warmth now, reminders of the love that had shaped their family. One sunny afternoon, as Emily practiced a new song on the balcony overlooking the city, Jonathan joined her, leaning against the railing as he listened. "Do you remember the first time you played for me?" he asked, his voice tinged with nostalgia. Emily nodded, her fingers pausing mid-strum. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice soft but steady. "But Marcus said I could do it. And you believed in me too." Jonathan smiled, reaching out to ruffle her hair affectionately. "Always, Will," he replied. In that moment, surrounded by the sounds of the city waking up to spring, Jonathan realized they weren't just survivors anymore, they were builders, creating something beautiful out of the pieces they had been given. And, as Emily resumed playing, her voice rising confidently above the hum of traffic below, he knew they would keep building, together, for as long as it took. The arrival of spring brought with it a sense of renewal, as if the world itself was shedding its winter coat to reveal something fresh and vibrant beneath. For Jonathan, Emily, and Marcus, this season marked more than just a change in weather. It symbolized new beginnings, a chapter they had fought so hard to reach. The days grew longer, filled with sunlight that streamed through the windows of Jonathan's penthouse apartment, casting warm patterns on the floor where Emily sat practicing her ukulele. Her fingers moved deftly across the strings, each note ringing out with a clarity that mirrored the transformation within her. Gone was the shadow of silence that had once defined her. In its place stood a girl who laughed freely, sang boldly, and embraced life with an enthusiasm that inspired everyone around her. Jonathan watched her from the kitchen, sipping his morning coffee, marveling at how far she had come. It wasn't just about her voice anymore, it was about the way she carried herself. The confidence in her step, the sparkle in her eyes when she spoke. She was no longer the child who hid behind stuffed animals, or avoided eye contact. She was becoming someone extraordinary. Marcus, too, seemed different these days. His presence radiated a quiet contentment, as though he had found a piece of himself he hadn't realized was missing. Working with Emily had rekindled his passion for teaching, reminding him why he had fallen in love with music in the first place. Through Jonathan's foundation, he traveled to schools and shelters, sharing his knowledge and encouraging children to express themselves through art. He often returned home, tired but fulfilled, his guitar slung over his shoulder, and stories spilling from his lips about the kids he had met, some shy like Emily used to be, others bursting with energy and creativity. One evening, as they gathered around the dinner table in Jonathan's apartment, Marcus shared a particularly touching story about a boy named Elijah, whose mother worked 2 jobs to keep their family afloat. He didn't say much at first, Marcus recounted, his voice soft but animated. But when I handed him a drumstick, he lit up like a firework. By the end of the session, he was leading the group, showing them rhythms I'd never even heard before. Emily listened intently, her chin resting on her hands as she absorbed every word. When Marcus finished, she leaned forward and asked, "Do you think Elijah will perform someday, like me?" Marcus smiled warmly, nodding. "If he keeps going, there's no telling how far he'll go, just like you." That question lingered in Jonathan's mind long after the plates were cleared and the dishes washed. It struck him how interconnected their lives had become, tapestry woven together by threads of loss, resilience, and hope. What started as a chance encounter in the park had blossomed into something profound, a bond that transcended differences in background and circumstance. Marcus wasn't just a mentor to Emily. He was a friend to both of them, someone who understood pain and healing in ways few others could. And Emily, in turn, had become a beacon of light not just for her father, but for everyone fortunate enough to witness her journey. Her performances continued to draw crowds, not because of technical perfection, but because of the raw emotion she poured into every song. People left those concerts feeling moved, inspired, and sometimes even changed, as though her courage gave them permission to face their own struggles head-on. Jonathan couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for Marcus, for the community that had rallied around them, and most of all, for Emily, whose resilience reminded him daily of what truly mattered. As summer approached, the trio decided to organize a special event, a free outdoor concert in the same park where it all began. They called it a new beginning, a celebration of music, connection, and the power of second chances. Flyers went up around the neighborhood, inviting anyone and everyone to attend. Local businesses donated food and supplies. Volunteers signed up to help set up stages and sound systems, and musicians from across the city offered to perform alongside Emily and Marcus. On the day of the event, the park buzzed with excitement. Families spread blankets on the grass, children chased bubbles in the air, and vendors lined the pathways, selling lemonade and snacks. Jonathan stood backstage, watching as Marcus tuned his guitar, and Emily adjusted the strap of her ukulele. Nervous energy crackled between them, but it was tempered by the knowledge that they weren't alone. They had built something bigger than themselves, something rooted in kindness and shared humanity. When it was finally time to take the stage, Emily hesitated for a moment, glancing back at her father. Jonathan gave her an encouraging nod, mouthing the words, "You've got this." Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by the microphone stand in front of her. Beside her, Marcus strummed the opening chords of their chosen song, a heartfelt ballad about finding strength in vulnerability. Emily closed her eyes, letting the melody guide her, and began to sing. Her voice soared above the crowd, clear and unwavering, carrying with it the weight of everything she had overcome. Tears glistened in the eyes of spectators as they listened, some swaying gently to the rhythm, others clutching loved ones close. When the final note faded into the evening breeze, the park erupted into applause, cheers echoing off the trees and buildings surrounding them. Emily turned to Marcus, her face glowing with pride, and he grinned, pulling her into a quick hug before bowing dramatically to the audience. Jonathan wiped away tears as he joined them on stage, raising Emily's hand high in the air like a champion. "This is my daughter," he announced, his voice thick with emotion. "And tonight, she reminds us all that no matter how dark things may seem, there's always a reason to believe in tomorrow." After the concert, as twilight settled over the park and stars began to twinkle in the sky, the three of them lingered by the pond where ducks floated lazily on the surface. Marcus sat on a bench, plucking absent-mindedly at his guitar strings, while Emily skipped stones across the water, giggling each time one skipped farther than expected. Jonathan stood nearby, his hands shoved into his pockets as he reflected on the journey they had taken together. So much had changed since that first visit to the park, their lives transformed in ways he could never have anticipated. But amidst all the growth and progress, one thing remained constant: the bond between them, forged in moments of uncertainty and strengthened by acts of love and trust. As he watched Emily laugh and splash water playfully at Marcus, Jonathan felt a profound sense of peace settle over him. He knew challenges lay ahead. They always did, but he also knew they would face them together, armed with the lessons they had learned along the way. Before leaving the park that night, Marcus handed Emily a small notebook filled with blank pages. "For your next adventure," he said with a wink, "write down your thoughts, your dreams, your songs. Who knows? Maybe one day we'll hear them performed right here." Emily hugged the notebook tightly to her chest, her expression thoughtful yet excited. "Thank you, Marcus," she whispered, her voice steady and sincere. Jonathan shook Marcus's hand firmly, gratitude shining in his eyes. "We wouldn't be here without you," he said simply. Marcus chuckled, waving off the compliment. "Nah man, you did the work. I just pointed you in the right direction." With that, they parted ways, promising to stay in touch and continue working toward a brighter future for themselves and for others. Driving home later that night, Emily fell asleep in the passenger seat, her head resting against the window. As the city lights flickered past, Jonathan glanced at her occasionally, smiling softly at the peaceful expression on her face. For the first time in years, he felt hopeful not just for Emily, but for himself and the world around him. Life was unpredictable, messy, and often painful, but it was also beautiful, full of moments worth cherishing and connections worth nurturing. As they pulled into the driveway, Jonathan turned off the engine and sat quietly for a moment, listening to the hum of the city beyond the windshield. Then, reaching over to gently wake Emily, he whispered, "Let's go inside, sweetheart. Tomorrow's waiting for us."